The Trump administration has gotten quite a bit of criticism for its handling of the relief efforts in Puerto Rico. Now, of course, Hurricane Maria has completely destroyed power and electricity in the island, and it has also led to people panicking about their access to clean drinking water, to food, to medical supplies. Some individuals have had to bury family members in their front yard because they have no access to services that would allow for a proper burial. Things are really bad. And so the response from the US government toward the relief effort in Puerto Rico was very different from the response effort or the relief effort in Houston and in South Florida. And so I'm glad that the media has stayed on this story and continues to pressure the Trump administration to do something about it. And it appears that today the administration has done something. So let's start with the first thing. There was the Jones Act. The Jones Act would essentially force Puerto Rico to receive all of its materials and supplies for the relief effort from US ships. And as a result, it's actually hindered the relief effort because of costs, because of logistical issues. And so politicians in Puerto Rico asked the Department of Homeland Security to please waive the Jones Act temporarily so they can get what they need for the relief effort. At first, the Trump administration seemed a little unwilling to do so. In fact, let's take a look at this video of Trump addressing that situation earlier.
Well, we're thinking about that, but we have a lot of shippers and a lot of people people that work in the shipping industry that don't want the Jones Act lifted, and we have a lot of ships out there right now.
Okay, so he just that's the thing, Trump's not tactful, right? Any other politician, any other president would find some sneaky way of making an excuse, but Trump's like, yeah, I mean, my cronies in the shipping industry really want to make money off of this terrible situation, and so I'm gonna go ahead and listen to them.
Funny, while I was draining the swamp one day, one of the swamp creatures grabbed my leg and he totally scared me. So I was like, okay, you get what you want just this one time. Please.
And by the way, Puerto Rico wasn't saying, no, you need to lift the Jones Act, repeal the Jones Act, which by the way was passed in the 1920s and has cost Puerto Rico a lot. They pay 40% more for their cars. They pay hundreds of millions of dollars more for imports from the mainland. So it's been pretty negative for the economy of Puerto Rico. And remember, they don't have the same bankruptcy protections that states in the US have. And so whatever, politicians in the island are saying, look, just temporarily waive it so we can get the materials we need and not pay an arm and a leg for it. And so finally, Trump and the Department of Homeland Security agreed. Sarah Huckabee Sanders released a tweet today saying that the President of the United States has authorized the Jones Act be waived for Puerto Rico. It will go into effect immediately. Now, real quick, before, it wasn't just liberals that were criticizing Trump for his response or lack thereof. There were some Republicans who also criticized him, John McCain being one of those Republicans. But Lieutenant General Russell Honore, who actually led the successful relief efforts at Hurricane Katrina following Trump's failed efforts, actually said something about what Trump has been doing or what he hasn't been doing. And I thought this was an incredibly strong statement. I wanted to share it with you guys. Let's take a look.
What's your response to that, General? The president seems concerned about the shipping industry.
I want to keep it clean. That's a crying damn shame. I knew since yesterday that big shots in Wall Street were making this call. And the president has shown again, he don't give a damn about poor people. He don't give a damn about people of color. And the SOB that rides around in Air Force One is denying services needed by the people of Puerto Rico. I hate to say it that way, but there's no other way to say it.
Wow.
Remember when Kanye was criticized for that?
Yeah, in fact, we have the video that you're speaking of. Here's Kanye responding to Bush after his failed relief efforts after Hurricane Katrina. Take a look.
May end up being the most tragic loss of all.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Please call.
In the past few days.
Can we just watch that one more time? It's just the best video ever.
May end up being the most tragic loss of all.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Please call.
In the past few days,
Is Chris Tucker standing in front of a refrigerator? All of it's so good. Every small aspect of that is
Mike
perfect.
Myers. Mike Myers, like it took a while to sink in. Anyway, that video is amazing. But yeah, it was definitely a Kanye moment, except it wasn't Kanye. It was, a lieutenant general who went in to New Orleans and actually, succeed. I don't want to say succeeded, because there's still a lot of devastation in parts of New Orleans that was damaged from the hurricane. But he actually did manage to succeed in some things, whereas Bush had very little response. And so it's interesting to hear from him now and hear what he has to say about another Republican president and his initial failure to really robustly address what's going on in Puerto Rico.
This always leads to other aspects of why people are concerned about things, like the way that Donald Trump took a couple days, or at least seemed a bit detached from his visit, even down after Irma hit, right? Or then when W flew over and just looked out his window, it was that very now infamous picture. So what people generally need is not for the photo op opportunity, which Trump eventually did when he was carrying supplies into the back of a pickup truck because he's helping so much, but just you can go and see what people are actually experiencing. People said the mayor of one of the cities in Puerto Rico is living in the same conditions that her citizens are. So she's understanding what they're going through. So when she talks to people about what's happening, she's not hearing it because someone told us, because she's living it. And so she understands the level of devastation. So when a guy goes to visit, the reason you go visit is so you don't only care about the shipping guys in your swamp, but you care about the people that are there because you're like, man, I didn't know people were living like this. But you don't choose to go there because, ugh. And so now we can make these assumptions about how you feel about people of color, because you haven't given yourself a chance to actually care about them. You care about the people that you're closest to. We just know how that's how human nature is. And people don't care about gay people until they're in their family. Like, oh, I have a gay cousin now, so now I care about his rights. Sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. And we had signs of this during his campaign. This is a man who, instead of working the Iowa caucus, which he lost, he swooped in on his jet, was outside of the caucus, gave a speech and wanted everybody to come to him. So he has a history of not getting down on the ground with folks. As like he's a germaphobe, but he doesn't like people. And when you're a politician who doesn't like people, it's these moments that really cost you the presidency. I mean, that was the turning point for George W. Bush.
Oh, girl, I hope it costs him the presidency, right? Because I think it's taken a very long time for some of his voters, and I'm not talking about his base. His base is still pretty loyal to him. I'm talking about people who are like, I really don't want to vote for Hillary Clinton, so I'm gonna vote for the other guy, right? So people who voted for him are now kind of thinking, wait, does he care about me? Because after he got elected, his response to criticisms over why he hasn't filled his cabinet with, average Americans was, I don't want poor people working for me.
Right.
I mean, what does that say to you as an American who voted for him out of, economic desperation? And so I think this is another example of that. But, I think you also have to consider, and this is just me playing devil's advocate, that a president going to, the storm-stricken parts of the country is also a little bit of a logistical nightmare, right? And so there have been politicians in Texas, in Florida. I haven't really heard about it in Puerto Rico, but in other states that have been devastated by hurricanes that have said, look, actually having the president here would be a nightmare. So we're glad that he's not coming, right? And so that's the other side of it that I wanna make sure that we represent. Real quick, here are the other relief efforts that have just been announced. Let's go to graphic 4. The more robust approach includes the deployment of the USNS Comfort, a hospital ship that has responded to other natural disasters. There are about 5,000 active duty US service members and National Guardsmen on duty assisting in Puerto Rico. FEMA has also released details about the amount of aid provided to the islands thus far, including 4 million meals, 6 million liters of water, 70,000 tarps, and 15,000 rolls of roof sheeting. The agency has said that the federal personnel are aggressively working 24 hours, 7 days a week to restore power, communications, and port access. So the military is now heavily involved, and it seems as though the relief efforts are taken much more seriously. And so that's good news all around, and hopefully, people get the materials that they need, including fuel, gas, water, Fuel and gas is the same thing, I acknowledge that. Medical supplies. It's good to hear that there's at least somewhat of a positive update to this.
Let's not forget though, in Trump's budget, they want to cut FEMA.
Of course they do. Of course they do.
TYT membership gets you commercial-free Young Turks. Download it, stream it, podcast it, get all the network shows, and support independent media. TYTnetwork.com/join.